All right, it says we're alive now, so I guess we'll go ahead and get the formalities out of the way. This is Shadowfall Symphony, who don't step in the game. I have we now, Jake the Senpai. I guess go ahead and give a quick hello to everybody that's viewing right now, and what you're about and
Mm,
what you do.
I'm Jake the Senpai. I'll call myself a more of a video game hobbyist enthusiast. I reckon. I play on all platforms. And I just give my takes on these games. And I guess we're here today to discuss about Nintendo and the hardware and their practices and all that.
Okay, okay. Um, so I typically do this in a multitude of these podcasts when it is a multi guest podcast. Uh, but I try to steal this from IGN as much as possible. But what games are you gaming since you're a multi console gamer
Like, what am I
currently?
currently playing?
Yes, yes.
I've been playing Persona 5 Strikers and Hyrule Warriors 2 and Luigi's Mansion 3. That's about it right now.
Okay, okay, okay. Me myself, I think I just finished off Halo 5. I'm in the middle of Hades right now on Switch, playing the Witness on my Mac, believe it or not. Um, and in the middle of trying to figure out what to do next and not not Rise of the Tomb Raider, but Shadow of the Tomb Raider. There's some optional missions and whatnot that you can go through from there.
Right.
And I'm doing that here. I'm doing this on Steam, so to get the whatever little Steam achievements there. Sometimes they don't even trigger, which is weird specifically for that install, but I, if I do it, I know I got it done. So that's all I really go from there.
Yeah,
But
I feel you on that.
yeah, so I'll make my own achievements anyway. If it comes down to it, I'll just screenshot it and post it on Twitter and keep it moving. But
Exactly.
yeah, so now that we got the formalities out of the way, the majority, the reason of what's happening right now is so we got into a little discussion about a week or so ago. I believe it was April the 11th, maybe a little bit earlier than that. But I think I have the tweet up here. Let me see if I can bring it up. Which is actually an interesting question that you asked because I think you're trying to just gauge where some people were at, their mindsets and whatnot. I was kind of wondering where that was coming from, but we'll take a look at it here and see what we have here. Um, so what we have here is the original tweet you put up. Um, so I want to know why people love the Switch. I seriously do. I want to know why you enjoy it besides the portability. What does it offer that PC, PlayStation, and Microsoft don't? First party games, lack of backwards compatibility, weak specs, or is it unconditional love for a Nintendo? Now, I'm going to assume by default that there's a little bit of this was in jest um, coming from there. And I guess the issue that I have with it is a lot of the times what's said in jest becomes the Overton window. Like you'll say something and the joke becomes so much of a joke that people believe that it's true. Um, and it some of the people in this thread I responded to as well, and they were kind of some of the stuff that they were saying was kind of crazy for or against Nintendo at this point, which was kind of weird. I'm like, if you guys are gonna stand Nintendo or hate Nintendo, y'all can find better ways to do it because there's things that go well and there's things that don't go well. Just be truthful about it and it's okay. Um, in particular, I know the first party games are going to be a thing. So were you saying that part in jest because it shouldn't even be an opinion at this point. Like factually speaking, Nintendo has been a first party company longer than anybody else that's in the industry right now. They have a larger catalog of those type of first party titles, so I'm hoping that was not a joke.
So my initial tweet was, and see, I didn't think it was going to kick off. So my initial tweet was to gauge why people enjoy the Switch. Pretty much the basis, is it the first party games? Is it, the lack of backwards compatibility, or is it because of the backwards compatibility of NES and NES? I mean, SNES and NES. Is it the specs, the weak specs, or is it the unconditional love for Nintendo? Because what I see on Twitter from like on Nintendo of America and Nintendo side of Twitter, I see a bunch of unconditional love, and see I dwell more on the modding side of Nintendo. I like to see the modding community and partake in it. Like, I own a modded Switch and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And like, and looking at Nintendo's like business practices. So the modding community found out that Nintendo uses an emulator for 3D All Stars. They made
Mm-hmm.
an in-house N64 emulator, GameCube emulator, and Wii emulator. They're simplistic emulators that up-res the game in 1080p through DSR, and it does it quite well. But I'm over here sitting like, they did this collection and they didn't do any other game using this emulator. Like, Skyward Sword HD isn't using the emulator. Why not bring over Mario Kart Double Dash through that emulator? Because the modding community also found out on GBA Temp that all they did was drag and drop an ISO file into the emulator. So I'm like,
Yeah.
well, this is a pretty lazy port. This isn't even like a real remaster. This is just an emulator on the cart running the game.
They've done that before. I did with the mini consoles. That essentially were running I would say going all the way back to INES images on those on the NES Classic and the SNES Classic. We're using classic ROM dumps, if you will.
Right.
But they hired the people that develop those emulators internally to, I guess, continue to reverse engineer them to use them privately within products that Nintendo was going to develop. So is the concern there that you would like for them to do more, or what exactly is that addressed?
I would like to see Nintendo do more. To see, all right, when the Wii U came out, I was like a really, really big fan. Like, I was out here in the streets, bro. Like, bro, yo, the Wii U is better than the PS4. Y'all are crazy. Splatoon, This is like the best, shooter out here, but this is better than Battlefield and Call of Duty. Like, this is the best game ever. Yo, you got Smash 4, you got Fatal Frame 5. Like, I was, really enthused with the Wii U. You had the whole little, you got the Wii U chat where you could like, FaceTime your friends and stuff on there, and you had Miiverse. The Wii U was a pretty solid system regardless of its specs. Like, pretty much the user interface and the user experience was pretty solid. And then you have the vast library of backwards compatibility, and that just all tanked with the Switch. And I mean, I don't know if it's because they switched to new architecture, because they went from PowerPC to ARM, and I feel like ARM is a hindrance, because you can do x86 on a handheld, because you can just look at the GPD. Maybe Nintendo can find some leeway with x86. Yeah, the heatsink is going to be probably an issue. It's going to probably be a loud handheld. It's going to make some noise, but I would honestly take that performance over something running on ARM and having it to be hindered, because I also own a Shield. And the modding community figured out that the Shield is more powerful than the Switch. And I found that really odd, because trying to run Android on a modded Switch is a living nightmare. Most of the stuff doesn't run. You said it should be?
It should be, yes. Because the firmware is custom and the libraries are custom. You're literally trying to bolt on top of stuff that was intended to run something else.
I wouldn't say that, because Linux runs perfectly, and you can run God of War on the PS2 emulator through Linux on Switch perfectly, full speed. But if you try and run something through Android on the Switch, like Dolphin, if you want to run Dolphin, it's not going to work. But you can run Dolphin through Laka, which is like a Linux RetroArch front loader for Atmosphere on the modded Switches. And you can run it through there, and you'll get better performance. But the modding team isn't really out here trying to
Yeah,
do several projects at the same time.
but I think
And
that's the difference, though, because Atmosphere is literally attempting to be custom firmware and do what the Switch firmware does. So it's a little bit closer to the metal than, say, Android porting Android over. Because when you port Android over, there's still interpretation in the firmware going back and forth to pretend to push switches and buttons here and there as far as machine code goes. So you take out that extra layer of abstraction when you use Atmosphere, because Atmosphere is literally replacing the Switch firmware. So I think that's probably where the complications come from when it comes to that. Just from general speaking. So with regards to that, since we're talking about the hardware and whatnot, you mentioned Wii U being, despite the hardware, it was generally a good machine because of the development around it, the vision that Nintendo had for it and whatnot. That system really got a bad rap, and we have the Switch because of how Wii U was dogged. A lot of the things that people complain about, and I don't want to say it's their fault, because it's ultimately it's the fault of the manufacturer, the company themselves, to get people interested in their product. But for whatever reason, it became extremely popular to not like the Wii U. For whatever reason. And all of the reasons that I've seen have been fabricated for the most part. When you have industry veterans literally pretending on live TV and on, live streams and whatnot in 2011 and 2012, 2 years in a row, 2 E3s in a row, pretending to not know what the Wii U was, that's so disingenuous to me. And considering that, the year after that, in E3 2012, right after that, I went to a pre-launch event where they literally tell you repeatedly, hey, this is a new console from Nintendo. They point to you and say, hey, this is the Wii U. It's behind this little black case right here. It's like a Wii, but it's a little bit thicker. And they tell you the exact thing. They give you all the rigmarole and everything. They tell you the console's HD, all that, and all the new upgrades and whatnot, the gamepad and everything that it does. These are games that were formerly on 360, and now they run really well on Wii U type situation, right? They run you through the entire gamut. And I hear and see those same representatives say the same things to all the attendees that came to E3. So where are these professional journalists that have been covering video games, some for more than 20 plus years, all of a sudden coming from, oh, well, I think it's a add-on for the Wii? What possesses you to get to that situation? And then we get to all the other arguments that are lumped in together, which is kind of getting back to this conversation, where the conversation of we think it's an add-on for the Wii becomes part of the premise of their statement, because many people thought it was an add-on for the Wii. No, that wasn't the case. You put that out there. So why? I'm guessing that. So that was my thing. I've had people say that, the online was bad and all this. I'm like, Miiverse was great. They were talking. Yeah, I never had a bad experience on Wii U. I uploaded my first YouTube video from any console of 8th generation. The first console I did it with was Wii U, Mario Kart 8. And it just blows my mind that the Overton window keeps changing. And what I mean by that is, it's not just the status quo or the standard. It's the status quo usually happens over time, and it's a result of people having accepted standards as a whole. This was literally forced. And so that's what I mean by pushing it. Like it became to the point where I'm saying it. Now I'm saying other people are saying it. And as a matter of fact, it's fact now. And please don't ever say that it isn't, especially on live TV when I'm trying to push this narrative. That's what hurt me so bad. And a lot of that came with regards to the specs as well. A lot of the quote unquote conversation about the specs came from people that didn't know what the fuck they were talking about. Excuse my French, but they really didn't. This is a ShadowCast. No, they didn't know what the fuck they were talking about. And so you said you follow the scene for Switch as well. With regards to the specifications, what makes you think that they're weak other than the fact that they are lower clock speeds than Nvidia Shield, which is the only reason why it would be quote unquote weaker than Nvidia Shield?
I would say the Switch is weak as well, not through like performance, but as well as like how they choose to develop these games and like what is being developed and what is being pushed for Nintendo. Like recently they came out with F-Zero, like what was it, the ex designer or creator of it was like F-Zero isn't gone, it just needs a grand idea, a bigger idea or something like that. And
Yeah,
you
that's
know
been said before.
yeah, I seen on Twitter where people are like, "Oh man, y'all weren't there back then, so why y'all want it now?" And I'm like, if you look at it, we live in the day of age where you got influencers. You got people like OJ. OJ can influence people to buy a F-Zero game. And if Nintendo had confidence to give this F-Zero game to a group of younger developers, maybe this game could be good because we've seen Animal Crossing, who was made by younger developers, do good. Splatoon was made by younger developers, did good. Mario Odyssey, made by younger developers, did good. I don't think Breath of the Wild was made by younger developers. I'm not too sure on Breath of the Wild, but that game did good as well. And it's the Switch. People are gonna buy it. Like I was really attached to Nintendo from the GameCube days, and so I miss seeing games like F-Zero, Wave Race, Eternal Darkness. Like games that they didn't necessarily make Nintendo, but it wasn't your typical Zelda, Mario, Pokemon, fiasco. These were some pretty unique games, that were pretty, I would say, broad for, a diverse audience. You have a whole survival horror game that can be marketed towards, horror fans. You got F-Zero, a more mature racing game than, Mario Kart. And I feel like another gripe that I have with, the performance of the Switch is, again, like I said, how they choose to make these games and such is, I know back in 2011, Nintendo showed off the Zelda tech demo, and I'm upset that they didn't go with that art style because I feel like that could have been like a really good Zelda game if they kept that art style and kept with it. Maybe it could have been some unique, something great. I
Well,
mean,
it
Breath of the
wasn't
Wild, but
unique though. That was literally Twilight Princess art assets they had though. Like Nintendo said, that's what that was. So it wouldn't have looked unique at all because
I mean,
they used an existing.
the cell shading on Breath of the Wild is, I mean, to me, in my opinion, the cell shading is pretty, not my cup of tea because it wasn't done right in my opinion.
Oh, how so?
I feel like the definition of cell shading within like video games, like if you're gonna do cell shading, then you gotta make it look like Dragon Quest 8, like pretty much the Dragon Quest series, No More Heroes. Like I feel like that's cell shading done well. Like that's soft cell shading, no outlines. That didn't really sit well with me. I didn't like the art direction. And then the game felt a little bit too open for me because I like my Zelda games pretty linear. Like I'm more of a fan of, Twilight Princess, Wind Waker, you know, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask. Like I like the linear Zelda games. So I felt
Uh,
like it was too expansive for me to really jump into.
when did you start playing Zelda games?
I started playing Zelda games when I was like 5, back in like 2004. I'm 21 now, so I'm a young bull, bro.
Okay, so you probably missed the earlier titles. Then it sounds like.
Yeah, I didn't play the earlier titles until the Wii Virtual Console. Yeah, yeah, I didn't play the older titles for the Wii. So I
So
played like
did
Majora's Mask and stuff through the classic controller on the Wii back in like 2010.
did you go through and play the original games, the
Yeah,
original um, duality? I guess it would be. So
yeah,
you've played Legend of Zelda and Zelda 2.
yeah.
Okay. And you didn't appreciate what happened with Breath of the Wild?
Nah, not really. That wasn't my cup of tea. I was thinking, they take the Twilight Princess route, graphic style, and the linear style of Twilight Princess, sort of follow up to it.
So the original Legend of Zelda that's literally how that game works. You walk outside, it's dangerous to go alone, and you figure it out as you go. The only thing you have is the manual to help you. And maybe a couple of people will talk to you inside of a dungeon or in a cave that you may find here or there. But the clues are so vague, you really have to learn how to play the game or start talking to people that also play the game to figure out, how to get through that game. So that's kind of that's what they were trying to do, because the entire physics demo was done in the original 2D Zelda style for planning.
Right.
So that was their goal with that. Now, as far as the art style itself, that's more of the painterly look, which is, I would say, a little bit more exaggerated over what Skyward Sword was. But that's, to each his own. That's an interpretation more than anything else. And I wouldn't even say it's graphically intensive at any way, shape, and point, because the entire game is CPU bound, so it's going to be more CPU struck than anything else.
Like I was thinking Zelda would, take the step in sort of like Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Like I was thinking like Zelda would take, that not like realism like that, but like you take the graphics of what that Wii U Tech demo looked like, and you pretty much shape it like Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order.
But why do that though? Exactly. What exactly would that add?
Because I felt like Fallen Order did the Zelda formula like perfectly. I felt like Fallen Order did Zelda better than Zelda ever did.
How so though?
From the combat to the like open exploration and storytelling, that's how I would say.
But you just gave the open exploration a dig for Breath of the Wild though. You didn't like it being that open.
This open exploration is, it's not linear. Like there's no, you're thrown out there and you're out to explore. But in Fallen Order, you're given a mode of where to go. You're given a quest list. You're given directions.
That doesn't exist in Breath of the Wild.
I mean, you would have to check back and forth to your Sheikah plate to see, where to go, and that's to me, that's I'm not really rocking with that.
Yeah, it tells you. I mean, it tells you what your next mission is. It's just it's pretty straightforward. They tell you what your mission is for the main story anyway. Now, your side missions and stuff, how you want to track that, obviously it becomes an open world game at that point, and you have to figure out what to do next and where to go next. But as far as the main story goes, that sits up top with the glowing, blinking little icon next to it to tell you what to do next for the story beats, if you will, to get to the final end of the game or what have you.
I mean, I overall wasn't a fan of Breath of the Wild. Like talking about, I enjoyed Horizon Zero Dawn more because they came out around the same time. They came out a month apart from each other.
Okay, I see people that say that. I personally, I don't agree with that, but
I would say another great with what I have with Nintendo is the development of Metroid Prime 4. They gave it to Bandai Namco at first, and then they were dissatisfied with the product, and then they gave it back to Retro Studios. Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't you give it to Retro Studios since they made your past 3 games? You pretty much fumbled, I don't know how many years of development that was being worked on by Bandai Namco that could have been for Retro Studios. I mean, don't get me wrong, I have high hopes for Metroid Prime 4 because they have a lot of big industry heads in there that worked on games like GTA and Battlefield and Call of Duty. So I have faith in that game. Mm-hmm. But it's just like, you wasted time and resources by giving it to Bandai Namco because Bandai Namco doesn't really have a good track record with making games anymore. So
they make one of the best-selling fighting games of all time, though. They're active developers for Super Smash Bros. That's who makes that game. Sakurai is given credit, but the majority of the development comes from Bandai Namco. They actually have a pretty good track record on development.
I mean, I wouldn't say so because if you look at Bandai Namco's like recent games, like look at Jump Force, look at Black Clover, look at the Saint Seiya game. These were some really missed the games, bro. That didn't really appeal to a lot of people. The One Punch Man game that was pretty mid. My Hero 2 is
So
Fighter Z was
you're
alright, but
but
that
you're
was
bringing up
artistic.
jobber games, like, so these are games that they're making for existing IPs, right? To make money,
Yeah, I mean this
basically.
is overall Bandai though, because you can look at the Dot Hack series. They brought over Dot GU, but they didn't bring over the original trilogy, and they refused to bring over the original trilogy. They don't even want to bring over Link. They don't even want to bring over Dot Link. So, nor the PS3 fighting game that was exclusive to Japan. That's praise. So I mean, I don't really have high hopes in Bandai making the games. And Bandai is making Pokemon Snap, the new Pokemon Snap game for Switch. I mean, it looks alright. I mean, but it's Pokemon Snap. You can't really mess up with it. You're just taking pictures of Pokemon.
Yeah, I'm really a big fan of a outside of the box view versus the inside of the box view. That view being basically your personal stance. You would probably have to see everybody's personal stance and reality as well. I can accept some of the things that you're saying being true, because yes, some of those games were phone home and they weren't done as well as far as third party projects for other companies doing IPs. A lot of companies do IPs to pay the bills. Platinum used to do a bunch of the games like that too, that were either middling or not that well received. But I don't think anybody would say Platinum is a bad developer. That being said, it would be kind of weird to just point out the games that you just pointed out and ignore how successful Smash Bros. Is, and they're the main developer for it. To ignore the other games that they've done as far as Star Fox, even though say what you will about some people, minority voice, I guess, online being critical of it while never having played the game. But they did a really good job as far as bringing that stuff over. And let's not forget, these guys make a little fighting game known as Tekken and Soul Calibur as well. I know the last entries weren't as great as the originals, but we can't say they don't have talent or that it would be a waste for them to do that, especially considering the original reason for Nintendo going to them to begin with was because Retro wanted to do something different. That was the original thing that they had said way back when, during the Wii days. They wanted to try a new project. So they started making Mario Kart levels and Donkey Kong and whatnot, and this is what we ended up seeing. But that doesn't really explain weak specs for Switch as a console, though. If you're talking about their development efforts and how their
I mean, you can look at how
business decisions.
I mean, you can look at how some of the games run, like Hyrule Warriors 2. That game is pretty abysmal on Switch. I have to overclock my Switch to max performance to get a stable 30 frames. That's pretty sad.
Why is it sad though?
Because you have Nintendo who literally put in an update for Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild to overclock the system to speed up the game faster when it loads, and then it turns off. Why not just leave that on so you can get better performance? It's already been proven that overclocking your Switch doesn't really hurt the life expectancy of it.
What do you mean as far as life expectancy?
So when the modding scene first came out and when they started doing overclocking on the Switch, some people thought that, if you overclock your Switch to max performance, you're going to hurt the internals of the system, and it's going to have a short life expectancy. It's not going to last as long.
No, it's been over tested. Foxconn over tested it, stress tested it already, so probably not. There's probably nothing you could do that Foxconn didn't do already. But yeah, go ahead.
Right. And so the modding community came out and said, it doesn't really hurt the system if you put it on max performance, as long as you're not like putting it in dock mode and playing it every on the hour, every hour, like you're playing it 12 hours straight in one sitting, then you might hurt the internals of the system, and it might not be a pretty situation. But I'm just like, if you gave users the option to overclock their system to have better performance on the base Switch, maybe they'll have a different view. I feel like I've been spoiled by playing games at 120 frames to 60 frames, and I'm probably reaching out from the Switch. I had high expectations for the Switch, and those expectations were, in my opinion, defeated. So
I just don't. I don't really see that. I've played games at 144 frames per second, and I can still go back and play Ocarina of Time, which dips down into the teens. It is a classic game and it's perfect to me, and it will always be that way because the game design was designed that way. What would be the issue as far as aesthetics for the frame rate being bad or perceived to be bad? Why would that be a problem?
Because I like my games to play, smoothly.
Why wouldn't it play smoothly to you? Wouldn't you still be able to control the character? What do you mean by smooth?
Yeah, I would have to control the character, but Hyrule Warriors 2, you can see those frame dips. The game dips to 9 frames whenever you use a special move.
But how does that affect you playing it though?
It's not a good experience. This is this is all subjective.
But I mean, I'm trying to understand your subjectiveness. So if you're saying that it's a bad experience, I need a little bit of a better explanation. But what do you mean by bad experience? Like, is the game not fun now, or what is happening?
All right, so performance is not making the game fun. So I deem the game not fun to me. It's not fun to play. The frames are lagging. The resolution is ass. I'm not really rocking with it.
So when you played those old classic games that you said you played in Virtual Console on Wii, when you went back to go play them, you disliked all those games heavily?
No.
So there were some of them that you liked.
I mean, they were 16-bit games, bro. These aren't.
Some of them were 64-bit. Some of them were.
Yeah, the N64 games, but I hardly play N64 games through the Virtual Console.
But even if they're 16-bit, the frame rate is still pretty bad, pretty choppy by comparison.
I mean, I wouldn't say so.
Why not? They're not running at 60 frames per second.
I mean, there's 16-bit games. You can't really tell the difference, really.
Why not, though? I don't understand.
Because it's a 16-bit game, bro.
Performance is performance, though. Why would the bit depth of the address space of the CPU matter for us?
You playing a game like Hyrule Warriors, and you comparing it to like a 16-bit game. Let's say Chrono Trigger. The frame dipping is going to be a difference because you can visibly see it and feel it if you're playing Hyrule Warriors 2, but you can't see it with Chrono Trigger.
I can see it when I play.
I'm gonna need some information or some sources of you playing 16-bit games and you feel the frames. As I never heard anybody, complain that they hear frame dips in 16-bit games in these older games.
Tales of Fantasia dips pretty bad. It dips in the teens, and it is a 16-bit cartridge, and it gets pretty slow because there are a lot of effects on screen. It slows down.
Yeah, but nobody really plays that version. Everybody, cycles over to the PlayStation 1 version.
I don't understand how you can't use the bandwagon concept. It still is a thing and it still happened. So if the frame rates are slow, and the same thing happens in other 16-bit games as well, there's occasional slowdown in Super Metroid. There's occasional slowdown in Link to the Past. There's occasional slowdown in almost all of the 16-bit fighting games. But they're still classics and they're still fun to play. Mario Kart has slowed down. It's mode 7. So I'm trying to understand where you're coming from with the performance equals lower performance equals a bad experience.
Because
I can tell you what you could use, because I've already been here. I've already had this discussion before. What you could use is when the frame rate or the performance of the game actually affects you playing, i.e. you cannot respond in time, or you're responding too far ahead in time and your inputs are not judged. But a lot of those old school games, even with that frame rate being low, something is being done in the planning of that game where that is not a factor. And that's kind of where I'm getting at, because even in Hyrule Warriors, that same planning was taking place. Managing input delay is one of the first things you do in int main when you decide you want to load what type of controller drivers are coming in and what type of inputs you're going to accept as a game.
I reckon. I mean, looking at Warrior games on Switch, most of them have that, that flaw. So,
I mean, Warrior games in general are not exactly great because they're all bad with CPU anyway. And that's just a flaw in game design, and that's a flaw because a long time ago, people thought that you put a whole lot of physics and a whole lot of AI on a CPU. Because they thought SIMD was more parallel and vast, and it was going to be more vast on the CPU going forward. And that didn't happen because people made GPUs more parallel, and people didn't program their games to use the GPU SIMDs in parallel. They should. Some developers are, but they still haven't moved there yet. So is that really a fault of the hardware, or is that a fault of the person programming the game? Because at this point, it's just generally the consensus of developers around the world still haven't moved this way yet. The machine is going to do what it's told to do. Because if you're talking about, and with regards to the CPU on Switch, the CPU on Switch, you're aware that it's a newer CPU than PS4 and Xbox One, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And per clock, that is technically a more capable chip on the CPU side anyway. We'll concede the GPU. We know this. It has less shader cores, right?
Right.
But even with that being the case, and you know that, hey, you need to take this game, I don't know, and hold it in your hand at some point, and you can't make the clock cycles that high, and you can't make the memory clock that high, why not run some of these subroutines on idle GPU cycles when they're not being used to update the display, and instead run the CPU tasks and send them back to memory? And I think these type of questions are never asked, and mainly because gaming press doesn't know to ask it.
Right.
I know you say you're following the modding scene for them. Is Atmosphere attempting to do any of that going forward with the latest version of their firmware?
Atmosphere is just a firmware. The overclocking stuff is made by a whole separate team, and they've done all they could do. All they do is make compatibility patches to go alongside new versions of Atmosphere. So the modding team has done everything they could possibly do with the Switch. Like they've already stated, there's nothing more that they could add to it because of the hardware.
I mean, they could. It was the main thing I just mentioned too. They could do, but it will require them to talk with the Atmosphere team because that's going to be extremely low level. We're talking about cores that aren't even presented to the operating system. It could be done if it's done offline on the firmware. So I'm guessing, has anybody ever thought about storing SIMD tasks on idle GPU shaders and then producing that result and representing it back in RAM? I'm pretty sure that question hasn't been asked to that community. What I'm suggesting to you right now is a very rare question. Have you ever heard anybody ask this before you talk to me?
No.
So one of the biggest things that, which I found ironic, was Sony and Microsoft kind of made the whole play of, hey, we have a stronger system or what have you, and look at this new AMD Jaguar core when the PS4 and the Xbox One came out, right?
Right.
And everybody ragged on the Wii U, and they said, hey, well, that CPU kind of isn't there. It's not doing what it needs to do because it doesn't have high SIMD. When Nintendo was telling you the entire time to run stuff on the GPU for high SIMD tasks, and then the CPU would just do other things as expected, and you'll get better performance. All developers did was run into the same bottlenecks they tried to use when they tried to port their 360 and PS3 code, since those were high SIMD CPUs, and found out that's not going to happen on on a tablet CPU core that they put in that they put in those. So what did they end up doing? They ran GPU shader tasks. The same thing they could have did for Wii U.
Exactly. See, I feel like, and see, like to not be like, so performance strict. And I feel like another thing that's, with the development of the Switch is not a lot of developers, mess with ARM architecture.
No, they don't.
They're not really informed on it, and they don't bother to it. Like this is why you have like Bethesda, sending off their games to panic button. What if Bethesda actually took the time, and this goes for any developer, took the time to, study ARM and really learn it, make these games from the ground up for ARM instead of, sending us half-ass ports. No, I have complete faith to see the Switch is a product of Iwata, and I have my own takes on Iwata, which is for a whole nother discussion. But with the new president, I have complete faith in him for a Switch Pro if that ever comes out, because it's been rumored to death. And at this point, it is what it is. If it comes out, it comes out. But I have faith in it that
I'm glad you're with me on that. But
if they do 1080p and a steady 60 frames, I would be 100% satisfied. That is 100% reasonable. I don't even want 4K. Just give me like 1080p 60 frames. I will gladly pay $400 for it and call it a day.
Okay, how long have you been a PC gamer?
Embarrassingly, like the past 2 years.
Okay, the past 2 years, right?
Right.
So
I ain't rocking anything fancy. I got a 1050.
So you got to see. It's not even a problem. I guess the computer I'm using right now has RX 290s in it, so don't feel bad at all. This is not test bench. For 2 generations, almost 3 now, Sony and Microsoft promised things that their console could do, and they didn't do them. Originally, the PS3 was supposed to support 2 1080p streams simultaneously. That obviously didn't happen. You rarely even got HD games on those consoles in 7th generation, believe it or not. A lot of them were 540p, maybe 600p, depending on the game. Like per frame, what you were seeing was something around that. It wasn't really HD. It was SD plus, if you will.
Right.
And the frame rates were all over the place, depending on what type of lighting model or whatever they wanted to put in there.
You can look at Fallout 3, man. Fallout 3 on PS3, Jesus Christ, bro. That is the worst way you could play Fallout 3.
I talked about this last night on another podcast I was on, that I own from day one, Skyrim for PS3. So I understand the pain of buying a bad version.
Yeah.
But even that being said, you have games with regards to performance now, what we're talking about here. The same people that are agreeing with what you're saying probably right now for Nintendo or whatnot seem to have a little bit of acceptance with regards to really piss poor performance from games from CD Projekt Red, or from like Skyrim, like I just got through talking about. Like they seem to get an out, and I don't understand what that is.
Well, for one, bro, it's Twitter. You're gonna have those people. I know. I got shitted on because I started talking about how Sony and Xbox, they're just as bad as Nintendo, and I would say arguably worse. And like the beef I got with Sony and Microsoft is way worse than Nintendo, and it would need a whole maybe 10-hour discussion, because man, I don't get those two companies at all. Like, you have Sony trying to close down the stores, and they come back and say that they're not closing down the stores, and then they have no plan for backwards compatibility. That PS2 emulator on PS4 is god awful. Like, I tried to mod my PS4 and see how well that emulator is. I see why PS2 games didn't come out on it so well, because it has a horrible, horrible compatibility issue. Like, most games don't even run. And then you have to double patch it if the game is running off of DVD9. So if it's like a dual layer game.
Yeah.
And
So yeah, my general impression with them is the thing that I would say that sets them apart from Nintendo is Nintendo doesn't make those promises. So they'll say, "Hey, look, we got a console. It's going to output up to 1080p, or we have a console that's again is going to output up to 1080p. Nothing crazy. We're not putting 4K on the box and all this other kind of foolishness, knowing you'll never get anything like that."
right,
But the other two, they continue to do that because they're chasing buzzwords that I don't want to say they don't understand, but they assume you don't understand. And you go
right.
buy it blindly anyway, not knowing what the full story is.
Because that's like I know I had to witness with, oh my Jesus Christ, man. I had to deal with people who were like hating on Monster Hunter Rise, who were like PlayStation and Xbox fanboys.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, bruh, like, why are y'all saying it's not gonna sell? Lo and behold, the game sold 5 million. It ain't even been a month yet. This is outperforming, any PlayStation, PS5 game only or Xbox Series X game only exclusive. Like Monster Hunter Rise, did well. And that on top of that, it's coming to PC next year, early next year. That's even better. And kudos to Capcom because, they were able, because at first Capcom was like, yo, it's going to be really difficult for us to port over RE Engine to Switch. We got it running in dock mode, but, they were able to actually port the engine over. They were able to port a fork of the engine over, and it runs Ghosts and Goblins, it runs Monster Hunter Rise, and then supposedly Resident Evil Outrage was supposed to be Revelations 3. And I can't wait to see how that game looks because the Resident Evil games already look good on the RE engine. So imagine it, on Switch. It's going to look, pretty good for an exclusive. Capcom put time into making Monster Hunter Rise on Switch.
So you just pointed out what I wanted to say anyway. It's never really about the specs at the end of the day. It's time and money, usually. Because you see things like Monster Hunter Rise, you see things like Doom and Doom Eternal getting pointed to Switch. Amidst all the excuses and all the complaints about Switch hardware, even from some publishers, I won't say developers because developers are too busy programming games. They have no time to say stupid stuff like that. But a publisher will, make his PR statement and say, "Oh, well, we can't even get the start screen to run," or blah 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 blah. And then somebody's like, "Well, I can," and they hack the console and it's there. Um, or you
Right.
have a port house, like Panic Button that seems to do quote unquote the impossible, and they're like, "We just spent 6 weeks reconverting the code so it works better on ARM architecture." Like a lot of this stuff was endless cycles of there were wasted CPU cycles, basically looking for memory that wasn't there, looking for registers that weren't there because they were thinking, "Hey, this is running on AMD or Intel type chipset," and it wasn't. So I have you seen the the Witcher 3 documentary, or how can I say this, the postmortem on the videos page?
No.
Yeah, they spent several weeks and all they did was reverse engineer how all the CPU calls were done on the older consoles and PC. And within the time of them completing that project, their performance had jumped up 30 to 40%. So even just looking at the numbers per se, um, on paper is not really going to be indicative of what you really get when you have a development kit and basically a bare metal platform, because you don't have Android in a way, you don't have Windows in a way, you don't have Mac OS 10 in a way, you don't none of that stuff. You don't have a giant OS on top sucking up resources. And even on the other consoles, generally speaking, with the exception of I think the Xbox consoles, there's a dedicated chip to run the OS. So on Wii U, it had a dedicated ARM core, the PS4 as well, and if I'm not mistaken, I think the PS3 did also. So it's not even a thing where the OS is necessarily in the way, other than it maybe chewing RAM. Um, so these consoles can make a lot of things better than what you think they would be on PC. Because you can't just make your PC delete Windows or run a game without Windows having any hooks in it whatsoever, especially if the majority of the games assume Windows is there and they have batch files calling extra DLLs and whatnot to bring everything together to build your game, or to, I guess, as a cheap fix to fix a problem that, or oversight in developing the game in question that you're playing. If there was a way to do that, I know Valve tried to do that. They tried to brand Steam machines and whatnot, which were cut down Linux machines. That would have been a good avenue to get PC started, but it didn't take off the way that it probably should have. I think that would have been actually a good thing for PC, but nobody bought it. So,
No.
But yeah, that's kind of more what my conversation was. Like, I didn't understand what you were meaning by quote unquote weak specs for the Switch. Me myself, I know you were talking about earlier, talking about, hey, why can't I just have more options to overclock this or whatever to play it on docked or what have you. You really can't trust a customer for something that you're developing to go around the world if you want the same end result for everybody.
Right.
The recent Peloton news should be big evidence of that. You can't even, things that are supposed to be an adult's responsibility still ends up falling on the company because they developed a product that ends up being in your house. So with regards to that, I think Nintendo designed the firmware and the OS, and they staged a lot of these hidden files and whatnot in the OS to make sure that it's consistent across both Switch and Switch Lite currently right now, and whatever new model they have planned going forward, whatever that would be. From what I see anyway, that's generally speaking, that's what they're attempting to do. And the more consistent it is, the better it is for them, because every Switch owner can play every Switch game, and you don't have to worry about anything being segmented. Kind of like, Series, well, not Series X, but maybe like the old Game Boy Color days, where there were a couple games that did not play on regular Game Boy, or DSi games that are trapped on DSi forever. That kind of segmentation you kind of don't want for a successful product with mass appeal. Why not just make it more successful and with mass appeal to everyone? When you try to start catering to niches, you become niche. I mean, Wii U is the clear example of that. Everything that everybody wanted on Switch currently right now, everything everybody's complaining about, I don't remember those guys bragging about this stuff when it was already there and available for Wii U. You just talked about the great things that Wii U was able to do. You could hook your hard drive to it. You can do all these other things, whatnot. You have all these different folders and stuff. You can throw all these different games in. Virtual Console was great. All that kind of stuff was there. And when it was there, nobody bought the console. So it's like I said on Twitter, I think that told everybody. I thought that told Nintendo exactly what they needed to know at that point. So I hear people complain, but then I'm kind of like, really though? Because when you had it, you didn't really give a fuck. So, all it's telling them is, for whatever reason, they marketed that product wrong, and they're not going to go that route again. So whatever they're doing, and if it's successful, they're probably not going to change drastically from it because it's working. They literally took Wii U games and put them somewhere else, and they sold a number of times more than they did on Wii U originally. So on a console that technically is stripped down compared to Wii U. So if you could play that same game on Wii U with all the features and being able to do your own save backups and all this other kind of stuff and whatnot, save as many games you want to your hard drive, and you don't, what does that tell Nintendo? They're like, hey, this new console we put out, everybody seems to be rebuying all these games for this new console that doesn't even have a disk drive and it doesn't have any backwards compatibility. I guess they don't care. They just want to be able to play a game wherever they go. And this is where we sit. So it seems like the portable aspect of it is critical to their business. So when you start saying, hey, I want to overclock this or overclock that, and when you're talking about the vast majority of people, and I'm not just talking about kids here, I'm talking about adults too that are not so tech savvy, their parents or whatnot, they're like, hey, I want to update this because I heard it would be cool. Let me overclock this Switch or whatever. and they're wondering why their battery life undocked is 45 minutes.
Yeah, it's
So
true.
that's some of the things when you're thinking as a multinational corporation, those kind of things, those are going to be the first things to come through. And they focus test. They have PR guys all around the world. They give them feedback. So it's not like they don't hear you. The problem is they hear more of other people that are buying the product and they're giving, you know what I mean? So you're one person, but if there's 100 million other people or potentially 100 million other people that say, hey, we want X, they're going to do X. Especially if when they tried to reach out to you, that was the U in Wii U, it was a blunder.
Yeah,
So
man, that's what made me disappointed because like every game I would get on Wii U, bro, I would always leave a like bomb ass review for Nintendo. Like, yo, I really enjoy this. I love how y'all bring it back Game Boy games, Game Boy Advance on Wii U. You brought back SNES. I could play Earthbound from my bed. Like, I really enjoy this, and it's we don't really have that anymore. I mean, if you mod your Switch like I did, I can do that, but I like to legally obtain it instead of emulating it, but that's what it comes down to.
yeah. I mean, so that console, I mean, obviously it was one of my favorite consoles as well. One of my favorite games on it is Xenoblade Chronicles X, and I think that game is woefully underrated. Woefully underrated.
Yo, exactly. Like I would love to see a Switch port of that, but I hear both sides of like because there are some people who are like, oh man, that can get a Switch port. It uses the gamepad a lot,
It
and then like
does.
yeah, and like my optimistic self, I'm trying to be like, man, maybe Nintendo can find a way to incorporate it so it can all work on one screen.
They
But
found a way to do it with Splatoon, but it's not the same. It's
yeah,
not.
yeah,
It's not like how Xenoblade Chronicles X is different.
bro.
And I don't know how that will work. To be honest with you, and I'm spoiled by it having the two screen setup. Personally, that's my preferred way to play it, and I can have a pro controller in my hand and have the gamepad sitting on its little stand over here, and then have my TV over here, and I'm doing all kind of multitasking, if you will, with regards to that console. Um,
Right.
but yeah, that was kind of what I wanted to get into in regards to that individual tweet itself. I I do think specifically like first party is going to be the main. If we're just talking about the main reason why people would want Switch, it's going to be those games because you can't get them anywhere else. It's definitely going to be that.
Right.
You're not gonna get a Mario Kart. It's never gonna be on Game Pass. It's just not gonna be a thing.
No, I
Um,
mean I don't even support Game Pass, bro. Buy your games, man. Buy them. Support the developer. Don't mooch on Game Pass. PS Now. Buy the game if you really like it. Buy it.
they're only gonna be here so long. Eventually, the media is gonna be so big, dealing with like Call of Duty and stuff like that, approaching 300 gigs or so. You're
Man,
not even gonna have a medium to buy this stuff on going forward. So
right,
it's get them while you can. It's kind of my whole scenario. So
right.
um no, that's kind of all I wanted to talk about with regards to that discussion. I mean, were there any other topics that you wanted to cover with that whole scenario? Is there anything else you wanted to mention here? Because I'll probably try to see if the chat had any questions so we can kind of go from there.
Nah, I mean, no, not really. I would say like another performance thing about the Switch. Some like I really give kudos to, and it's not like particularly Nintendo, but more of Game Freak. But I really enjoyed how Game Freak, you know, came back from like Sword and Shield, like all that criticism to show off, Diamond and Pro remakes, and on top of that, Pokemon Legends.
Yeah,
It looks to me, Pokemon Legends look, pretty dope. It looks like a major upgrade from Sword and Shield. I got my own little
yeah.
theory of it. You see the frame rate of some of the Pokemon in the distance. It's pretty choppy, but I wouldn't be surprised if it ended up being a game that plays better on Switch Pro.
Yeah.
That's my own little theory about it.
If that thing happens, yeah, that would be a great that'd be a great improvement. I do think that I think they heard everybody, complaining about everything with regards to Sword and Shield and the type of Pokemon everybody expected. I'm pretty sure they have been working on that game for a while, and they
Right.
wanted to move forward. They saw the Breath of the Wild engine. They see what the Xenoblade guys are able to do with creating this engine, and then Nintendo goes in to do other things to make the game even better. So I'm pretty sure their take on it is going to be similar, and they're gonna spend all their money on it. We kind of had a test already though. Do you remember the game named Town?
Yeah, town. Yeah, yeah,
Yes, some gameplay concepts there was with regard to the engine anyway. Um, they were clearly testing, just trying to see what they could do as far as making a certain type of environment. So
right.
we'll see. I'm pretty sure the results are going to be good for Pokemon going forward with regards to that. I mean, I what I saw looked great. So and I as long as it plays like Breath of the Wild. I know you don't like Breath of the Wild, but as long as it plays anything like that, I'm
Yeah,
stoked. It works for me. So you can
right,
get regular Pokemon battles and do what you need to do from there, and
right.
meet and grab items or go on side quests. I think it'd be fine. So, um, but yeah, I don't. With regard to the games, I really don't think. I don't think there's a caliber. I don't think there's a first party with the wide scope of games that Nintendo has. A I don't think there's a Kirby to Eternal Darkness for any other platform. I don't think that exists for Xbox. I don't think they have that kind of a range. I really don't think
Nah,
Sony has that kind of a range anymore either.
nah.
They
Sony,
tried Astro.
Sony flopped, bro. They got rid of the Japan studio, and
Yeah,
like I be seeing, Sony fanboys, talk about, oh man, well the games weren't selling good, man. It doesn't matter. The games weren't good anyway. And I'm like, bro, what?
they sold good on PS1. I don't know what happened. You know, leading into the second half of PS2's generation, I don't know what happened there. Um, Katamari sold well, so I don't know what exactly started happening with regards to the Japanese studios and them kind of turning away from them. But they got moderate to good success out of a lot of those games, leading all the way up until the tail end of that generation of Generation
Right,
Six. So I don't know what the turn was. Maybe they took too long to adapt to HD development, and they didn't want to. They felt that they were anchors. I don't know. It could be any multitude of things, but yeah, clearly they're not focusing on having the broad range of appeal um, like Nintendo does. I think Shuya Yoshida kind of admitted it at one point. He said, hey, "Look, Nintendo's good at this, and they bring these guys up. We kind of need them around because when certain gamers reach a certain age, maybe we can grab those at that point, but we cannot cultivate them the way Nintendo does." He said they have timeless characters. The only problem with that is Nintendo's timeless characters are timeless, which means that the kids that grow up on them, they still want them when they get older. You'll be as old as me and still wanting to play some of those type of games. So it's a double edged sword, and you're making a big gamble by hoping that Nintendo will shepherd your future customers. But I mean, such is business. So, but yeah,
right.
I don't really have much else with regards to the topic. So I think there may be a couple of comments in the chat. I don't know if anybody wanted to pose any questions or whatnot. Um, other than people trolling me saying after 10,000 years I'm free because I don't really do ShadowCast that much anymore. Somebody mentioned, what did they say here? Oh, somebody asked about Star Fox. Yeah, I mentioned Star Fox already. Um, and I'm trying to see what else somebody might have mentioned here. Uh, Somebody mentioned Contra. I don't know when. Oh yeah, there's serious slowdown in Contra. Contra was real bad with that, but it played great. Somebody said 1940. Yeah, all those old NES games they were horrible with slowdown. Ninja Gaiden was bad with slowdown as well. Uh, And the game idea guy said, have they attempted to do all 8 of the cores to work together while the Switch is docked? And I'm going to say no, because the way that firmware is designed, even on the NVIDIA Shield, the OS does not see it. The OS sees it as 4 A57 cores, and you don't see the A53s. It does the offline task when the system is asleep. So unless they made completely different changes to the firmware for Nintendo Switch, it is not going to be where it's completely heterogeneous and you could just say, hey, A57 plus A53s go. I mean, you could, technically speaking, it could be done, but I don't think Nintendo paid Nvidia all that money to reverse engineer it that far deep. I think they wanted to get a game console running pretty fucking quick. So I don't think that was the kind of thing they would do. Could somebody really smart make that happen? Possibly, but currently speaking, from what I understand, when your system goes to sleep or when you play undocked for a considerable period of time, you're using the A53s for offline tasks or background tasks. For there's one dedicated A57 for background tasks anyway, and then there's an A53 that they uses them when the system is idle. So I don't really think there'll ever be an eight core situation with them. 8 cores are there. They're there. So whether they're being used for a game or not, that remains to be seen. But I mean, the same is true for the other consoles as well. They have some reserved to the operating system. So I believe the PS3 can use up to 7 now in the game. And OG Xbox One has 5, I think, dedicated to games. But for Switch, you only get 3 cores from what I understand. So 3 cores available to you in there, and they're only A57s. If you get the A53s, it's because you're really genius and you know how to trick the firmware into doing something it's not designed to do. That would be my opinion on that. But other than that, no, we're not going to talk about Switch Pro rumors. I probably could do a 6-hour podcast on just that, going through all that kind of stuff. But are you generally familiar with how I won't say shady, but how some of these new rumors, or how can I say this? These rumors tend to lean on the brand of the organization that's reporting the information rather than the person that's reporting it.
I never really noticed that, but I noticed like a lot of these rumors are, I mean, most of them are unreliable. All of them are really, because I mean, Nintendo hasn't made an official statement on it.
Yeah.
So, and I remember at first they were talking about the Switch Pro was going to use the Xavier chip, all 8 cores, and I'm like, bro, that's the madman stuff, because Xavier using all 8 cores, bro, that's over $700, and Nintendo doing that, that's out of this world.
Yeah, that's way out of scope for them. And some of the other stuff that we've been seeing too, like most of the rumors that have been coming out lately have been coming from the Mochizuki guy, I believe he was a Japanese correspondent for Wall Street Journal first. I think it was Wall Street Journal Business, I believe, at first, and then eventually he moved over to Bloomberg, being their correspondent. And so now what people are doing is saying, oh, it's Bloomberg. Bloomberg has an article, blah, blah, blah. It's not Bloomberg. It's the same guy that's been talking about Switch Pro since 2016. It's the same guy. Some stuff he says is right, Switch Lite. Some stuff he says is wrong. Cartridges, having an SSD, having IGZO screens. The screens have changed like 2 or 3 times now as far as what the new upgrades are going to be. It's hit or miss, and it's really just that source. And it doesn't matter what brand he goes to now or what organization he works for now. That doesn't magically make him more credible. What makes him credible is his track record. And I have to say, it's like not even 50-50 for him. It's more like, 3 out of 10 right now at this point.
For real. I remember they were talking about the Switch was supposed to be at, E3 2016 and all that other stuff, because Bloomberg were the first ones that really popped off this whole Switch rumor, because they seen the patent back in 2015.
Yeah. They
And
saw the
then
patent. Mm-hmm.
and then like around like maybe February 2016, around the Pokemon Sun and Moon leak, there's about the Switch is going to be at E3, it's coming, but we never got an official announcement until like what 4 months before the system released back in October.
Yeah. The
So
only the people that got it first were so they didn't get to see the leaked documents, but they got to interview a Foxconn employee that he eventually ended up leaking more information later on. He leaked documents that he wrote down while he was working at the fab. They were basically doing the last little bit of testing, stress testing for the Switch models that were going to end up going out in March. And so back in February or March, Semi Accurate got this article. Their paywall site or whatever, but they got the scoop. They ended up saying, "Hey, look, this is it. It's going to be using this type of architecture. I mean, with extreme details, telling you what the controller looked like, the buttons it would have, all of that." And that was the only true leak that actually came through, and it was completely legitimate. Then the second Foxconn leak came out, and it got confirmed because it ended up being the development unit for the Switch. And after that, everything's just been kind of all over the place. You haven't really seen anything be concrete really at all, other than Switch Lite. And I mean, you follow the mod scene. You saw the Switch Lite coming already. It was in the firmware.
exactly.
They told you exactly what the name of the core. Oh, we're gonna update the cores. Oh, they're a little bit faster, so therefore, we're gonna release a model with this modest speed increase because we die shrunk it a little bit, and we're gonna re-release it as a new model. And the new models were there. So, and that was it. They were saying Switch Pro then, and I'm like, Switch Pro looks like the new model of Switch that came out with the Switch Lite. I mean,
Then you got the DLSS, bro. That's the new talk now. DLSS. The Switch
yeah,
Pro gonna have
they're killing
DLSS.
me with that. DLSS requires internet connectivity. That means the Switch will need an LTE modem inside of it for this to be consistent. And Nintendo is not the type of person. I don't think they're the type of company that would just say, "Hey, we're going to give you this thing. We're going to advertise this specification to you," but it doesn't work when you undock. I don't think they would ever produce anything like that. Like, if they did, it would surprise me. I don't think they're that type of business where they would do that. Just personally speaking, from the several several decades of years I've been following that company, I don't think that's something that they would do. The closest thing I've seen to them do like that was with the Pokemon camera, I guess, for the N64, maybe, and the expansion, the memory expansion packs for N64. That was the closest thing I've seen to where they just literally leave a game out in the wilderness. They're just like, you might be able to play this, or you may be only be able to play half of it because you don't have, you don't have the expansion pack with 2 extra megs of memory in it. But that was the closest I've seen. The Switch rumors they're just ridiculous now. So there's no point. I was going to release a video, but at this point, it's already extending past the hour mark of doing corrections and going through everything that this dude has gotten wrong, and numerous other YouTubers have tried to jump on top of and claim. I don't know. I don't know if it'll ever be released at this point because it is honestly frustrating to edit. But yeah, that's probably one of the most frustrating things I've seen. So, but yeah, I mean, you seem super cool, man. We only had one disagreement, and that disagreement is on like the Switch hardware itself. Personally, I think it's
Right.
far more capable than people give it. And the majority of the issues come from people just not wanting to treat it like the other consoles. They don't want to make it lead platform, even though it's clearly the best selling console of both generations now, both 8th and 9th. So, yeah, until I see, I mean, Capcom is doing what they can with Monster Hunter Rise and stuff like that. But until I see them say, "Hey, you know what? We're going to go ahead and do our own version. We're not going to port it. We're going to build a version of Street Fighter V from ground up for Switch, or Street Fighter 6 specifically for Switch, and Switch is the lead platform. We'll port the PS whatever after the fact. Switch is the lead platform for this game. If you want to see the best version of the game, get it for Switch first. You know, we may add some stuff like upscaling or whatever for the other consoles, but as far as how this game moves and how it seamlessly transitions from docked to non-docked, we plan for that from scratch. Like, I don't think there's any third party out there doing that right now. So it would be great if they did, but right now it's just Nintendo calling the shots. So,
right. I mean, I was surprised they ported over Fighting AX later on Switch.
Yeah. I'm trying to think what other game kind of surprised me too. I'm surprised by the South Park games being there, to be honest with you. I'm surprised this game over. I didn't think they would take the time to bring something like that over. That's a lot of work for a game that I don't think sold as well as it probably should have, because those games they're pretty good.
Give them props for porting over all those Resident Evil games. Like, that's pretty cool. You could take all those Resident Evil games on the go.
Yeah, all the Resident Evils.
Yeah.
Somebody said something about DLSS requires an internet connection. Yes, it does. You have to be able to send data down to, like, it doesn't know how to use the shaders to update to run the subroutine to scale, because you're using AI to scale your pixels appropriately. You're basically resampling pixels externally, and you're taking that external source to remap where they're going to be on your screen. So that logic has to come from somewhere and then get sent to one of the tensor cores or an available shader core to emulate a tensor core to provide that output. Yes, you need an internet connection for that. So I that's not said either. I don't think anybody mentions that either. And that's kind of weird to me. Like, it's in the SDK. You need it. Like, if you go to NVIDIA's page, they tell you how DLSS works. That's super easy to find. Their SDK shows you what's there, and there's different modes for it. As far as how it works and what it needs. But yeah, nobody mentions that. Nobody says, "Hey, you know what? Hey, we need DLSS. We got okay. Well, how is it going to connect so you can get that to work?" And yeah, I've never seen that address. I've been on one of the Spawncasts. I think they mentioned that at one point, and I said, "Well, how do you connect?" And I kind of got talked over. But it's just one of those other weird things too. It just seems like there's a certain amount of information that is acceptable, no matter how much information flies in the face of it. And I think that's kind of frustrating. But it is what it is. The name of this podcast is supposed to be Punching Up, but Photoshop crapped out on me about an hour before doing this podcast, and I refused to try to last minute edit it. So you're looking at a hybrid ShadowCast right now. So yeah, that's pretty much all I got, man. I'm gonna go ahead and call a night for you guys. Would you like to do another discussion like this? Because I do these podcasts. Hopefully I'll start doing them semi-regularly now, and I'll have a little bit more guests on and stuff like that. If you would like to come back on, we can bring you back on, man.
Well, yeah, I'm down for that, man. I'm down for that. I'd really like to talk about, like, the fumbles of, like, Sony and Xbox. Because, like, I feel like those are unaddressed, and, like, I would say I'm pretty unbiased. I don't really float to any other console. I just like playing the games.
That seems to be clear from this discussion. Yeah, that you're not really. There's no team you're going to root for here.
And, like, the fan bases, like, it's just the hive mind that these fan bases have, and it's like, especially with Sony, because it's like, okay, y'all are shitting on Japanese developers, but y'all are believing in Silent Hill rumors. Sony had Siren. Why didn't you support Siren when it was out? You have Siren Blood Curse, and you have Siren 1 on PS2, and Blood Curse was PS3. Why didn't you guys support it? Oh, but you guys are so quick to believe Silent Hill rumors for PS5, which is like the stupidest thing to believe.
Yeah, ponies for pony, man. I mean, but Nintendo fans they're not innocent either at all. And I don't even know what to say about Xbox fans at this point. I really don't. I don't even know what to say.
Xbox fans getting excited over a Perfect Dark reboot. Okay, that's cool, but it's a little bit too late. Seeing Xbox trying to revive these rare franchises. It's going to take a lot of work.
Why isn't Rare like they're not even attempting to hire people to bring back Rare's old franchises? What was the point of Microsoft spending all that money? They can't even. They took all these franchises away, and they can't even get the team that originally designed these games to come back. They can't.
Exactly.
Rare doesn't make any of those games anymore, so they get indie teams to build. I mean, it worked out well with Killer Instinct. That game was great, but
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. How do you do another Conquer? How do you do Banjo? It's frustrating, honestly. Like just seeing what I think they should probably just sign a deal with Nintendo somehow and just say, hey, look, man, just anything, man. Like we'll give you Game Pass, just whatever magic you use to make these games go. Like call whoever you need to call in to do a reboot of this because
Right.
they're on struggle.
That's what they needed because nobody's going to buy a Series X or a Series S just to play like a new Conquer game or a new Jet Force Gemini game or something like that. Nobody's going to do that.
Yeah, you need a multiplayer game, which is why I think Killer Instinct was a good launch game. That was pretty good for them to do. But there's no, I mean, Gears of War. I think it's run its course. We'll see what Halo Infinite does. Not. I'll put it this way: I'm not gonna run blindly into it thinking it's gonna be the greatest thing ever. It's gonna have to prove itself to me. At this point now, you got Sony and Microsoft making Call of Duty boxes, and that game isn't loyal to anybody. So I just don't. I don't know how this goes, and I don't know. Being a fan for either one of those, I don't know how that goes either. Because short of playing Grand Theft Auto, what are you really kind of bragging about that could be exclusive as far as like against anybody else? And it's only a matter of time before Rockstar is forced to get back on Nintendo's side. Anyway, I know they got a grudge against Nintendo, but they eventually are going. It's too much money sitting there, way too much money.
Right.
So
that's just like with Xbox fans. They're talking about, oh man, Xbox gonna purchase Sega, and that's something I would not want to see. I personally would not want to see the Sega franchises like Persona, because Sega owns Atlas now. I would not want to see Persona on the Xbox system. I would rather see Persona come to Switch and PC and PlayStation. An audience that will actually buy the game instead of just playing it through Game Pass. Because that's what's going to happen. Because that's what happened with Octopath. There's probably more people playing Octopath and Dragon Quest 11S through Game Pass instead of buying it on Xbox. And it's like, you're not really supporting these developers. You're not buying the game, and then you're going to complain about, oh man, we're not getting any more of these, Japanese RPGs. We're not getting any more Japanese games, and that's because you're not supporting it. You're playing through Game Pass.
That sounds scary, but it almost happened right after the Dreamcast failed. Yeah, Xbox was in heavy talks with Sega, and that's when Sega was shopping all their wares. They produced so many games in the 6th generation; it was great. They had Shinobi on PS2. You had all kind of GameCube games, all kind of Xbox games. Sega they were doing their thing in the 6th generation. So
we had Billy Hatcher on GameCube. That was awesome.
Yeah, you had really, if you were a Sega fan, you were eating in the 6th generation because you already had Dreamcast, and then when Dreamcast fell off, the other consoles like Sega was producing mad games because they weren't having to produce a console anymore, so they were just going out and just publishing stuff. And so it was great, but it got to a point where Microsoft was like really, they were a little too chummy with Sega. It almost could have happened back then. So, I'm kind of glad it didn't. And one game I did, he said they definitely do not need Microsoft purchases. Like, yes, I agree. We don't need any more mergers at this point, I think.
That's just like with the Square Enix incident. A couple of days ago, come from Bloomberg. Square Enix is up for sale, bro.
And Square Enix is a merger also. Like just like a merger of a merger. They ended up with Microsoft or whoever, EA or whoever wants to buy them. But yeah, it's a whole nother nut roll, man. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and I'll put this podcast up. Actually, it probably should be saved by the time we're done broadcasting this. If not, I'll have to do some editing, and then you guys will see it up soon. But other than that, that's pretty much all I got. You got anything you wanna pimp out? You have a YouTube channel, correct?
I have a YouTube channel, but I'm not really trying to make content. I'm just
Okay.
chilling, bro.
Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, I mean they can follow you at your handle here. So Jake the Senpai on Twitter. Black Super Saiyan, I guess is the title, but
Yeah.
yeah. So y'all can follow him on there and go from there. So this was a good discussion. It was a productive discussion. This is intentionally what I want to do to pull a lot of the bullshit out of Twitter, because a lot of back and forth is just it's a lot of let's see who can get the last word or who can make the snarkiest comment type situation instead of actually talking about the issues. And I think this way you have no choice but to talk about the issues.
Right.
So
I know I looked at one of your discussions with some dude, and it was about like the 8th generation and the Wii U, and this dude, he was like, "Man, I don't want to play Metroid. I don't want to play it.
I know exactly what you're talking about."
I'm like, bro, what you mean you want to play Prime, bro? Like, man said he had a PC, bro. Download Dolphin and play it, bro. Just play it some way, bro.
Like, these guys are out here. They're out here, and you never know if it's going to be someone like you or somebody like him at the other end of that Twitter handle. So I'm just glad. Luckily, the last couple of these I've been doing, they've been more like you. So, but yeah, I appreciate it. We're gonna go ahead and wrap this up now. So, if you don't have anything else for your outro, the only thing I have is: do you play games to have fun or to impress other people?
Right. I feel like I enjoyed this conversation with you, man. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm down to do this again anytime.
Awesome.
Just let me know. As long as I'm not busy, because I'm in college, so my schedule's pretty tight neat.
Yeah, I'll be doing the ShadowCast a little bit more regularly now that I got things kind of set up a little bit more here. So we'll definitely keep it going, man. But I appreciate it. So,
all right, dope.
All right. I'll holler